Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I did promise a conclusion on Tropico 5, and things have been a little up in the air, as you may have heard. So, it's a little later than I would have liked it, but my little Tropico island with its windy roads that are just slightly off-angle enough to infuriate you is trotting along quite nicely at the absolute end of the tech tree. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So let's do that. Well, the frame rate's sodding awful. Oh my god, is it bad. I'm talking below 30 FPS. I'm like 20 frames per second. This thing tanks at about 2,000 people here. There's probably a setting that I could mess with that might give me a bit of a better frame rate, but even over here, everything's still being simulated and it just trashes the frame rate. Thankfully, it's not something that's particularly important in a game that moves very slowly, but oh man, this is on regular speed. If I turn it up even faster than that, we lose even more frames. Just awful. Tropico has had problems for quite some time with optimization. It seems like Tropico 5 hasn't fixed a damn thing in that regard. Why? I couldn't say. You know, it's not a brilliant looking game. It looks okay. It's certainly not a brilliant looking game, but maybe it's the simulation of each individual. Funnily enough, if you get in nice and close here, it does certainly give you a little bit extra frame rate, but as soon as you zoom out and it's showing more than that, back down the frame rate does go. It's pretty disgusting. Alright, so this is the modern era. I showed you the first two eras in the initial video, and I've gone through Cold War, and I've also got to the end of the modern era, that being basically the end of the research tree. So this is how far the research tree goes. This is about where we were previously, and this is kind of where we are now. So you unlock everything except for these final three, because as you've probably seen in other strategy games, when you reach the end of the tech tree, you get what's called future tech. So you research one of three things, which is going to generate you either money, it's going to give you money for your Swiss bank account, or free building, and you can keep doing that ad infinitum. Just go, 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 keep going, keep going. Everything else, of course, has been researched here, so you get access to a bunch of unique buildings as well as additional options for the Constitution and things like the hydroponic farm and a bunch of different edicts and things like that. We're going to have a look at the Constitution first, and I'll show you exactly what options you've got once you hit the Cold War era, which is personal rights, economy structure, and media independence. So you can mess around with this, as usual, as three different options. Pick whatever you so desire. And then your final set of options are digital rights, globalization, and zero-emission ecology. So you can mess with your pollution levels. Frankly, zero emissions seems like the way to go. Really. Like, factory effectiveness plus 10 is nothing in the grand scheme of things. And let me demonstrate. Let's have a look at some of my factories. I'm going to have to actually find them in this mess, which is difficult enough because they don't have overlays. That's a high school. That's not a factory. Although one could argue it is a factory for the mind and or obedient citizens. So my cannery, actually, I forgot to do anything with this. I can fix this up very, very easily here. There we go. There you go. Have some of that. And up the budget. Shove a good manager in there. And suddenly, you know, this effectiveness is 166, yeah? After putting those upgrades in there. And I can get it even higher if I throw a manager in there that will increase the effectiveness. Like, say, a foreman manager, for instance. So we can throw a foreman in there, which is going to bring the effectiveness up to 176, and I can increase that even further if I've got mentor managers around the place. So, minus 20 is not a big deal, at least not on the regular difficulty level. So, a lot of these seem like they're no-brainers. The zero emissions thing, I mean, minus 75% factory pollution is an absolutely massive deal. It means that your pollution levels can be kept close to zero with the occasional waste disposal facility, as long as you've got enough metro terminals so that you don't have too many cars around, you don't build too many polluting buildings, and you'll just be absolutely fine. Globalization is a fairly interesting set of choices. I like that one, you know, because all of these, this is a kind of equal choice, so there's not an obvious one here, but for things like ecology, it's pretty hard to argue that any of these other ones are useful. I think on a higher difficulty level, it's entirely possible that energy efficiency might be needed because you'll be hemorrhaging money left, right, and center, but frankly, I am not. And as soon as the trade ships come in, this is going to get a huge boost. I'm exporting a huge amount. I've got enough trade docks for 14 ships. I'm exporting oil, meat, and rum. I'm importing a lot of stuff as well, as you can see, because eventually... that better be an oil route that I don't have ships on. I was going to say, why am I importing oil and exporting it? Lord knows. But eventually, your island will run out of resources. outside of course, farming and things like that. So I have no functional mines left on my island. I have no functional oil refineries left on my island. I've looked all over the place. I don't think there's any others. Annoyingly enough, there's no easy way to actually find deposits, which can be particularly irritating if you're looking for oil, which is a very, very small little spurt of black on the map. Mines can be annoying as well because they look very similar to rocks. What you would think is there would be an overlay to show this, but there's an overlay for agriculture. If I want to know where to grow some pineapples, no problem at all. I want to know where the nearest bauxite mine is. Can't do that for some reason. Yeah, that's a bit of a weird one. It got very annoying later on when I was trying to mine all the bauxite and things like that, which is not a mineral you really need until later on. Also, of course, getting uranium, things like that. It was a bit annoying to have to look around my island. This is only a medium-sized island. You can get a much larger one than this, so if there are any other mines, I haven't seen them. They're probably hid behind trees or something along those lines. God knows. But at this point, the island itself is kind of ticking over, and once you hit the modern era, there are many ways to make it tick over without having to worry too much about anything. One of those ways is the office block. So, let me find one. I've got a few lying around. How much is this made? Oh, only $2 million in its life cycle. What does it need? Nothing. Not a thing. It only needs people. So, basically, officers take in people and churn out massive amounts of cash with very, very little overhead. I mean, their budget isn't even that high. This is maximum budget here, and I have upgraded this one to require qualified professionals. That increases the effectiveness. Generally speaking, you want to balance between the two, because you don't want too many buildings that require college-educated people, because that's not going to be the majority of your population. So you want to keep some of the other officers at just regular level. This one's a college one as well. This one was built a lot later. It's had $345,000 worth of profits. And I just throw a couple of officers in every now and again. This one's made 365. This one only requires high school there. If I throw in a manager, things would probably get even better. I want to increase the number of customers served. And throw in an administrator there. There we go. Problem solved. And these things just generate infinite cash. I think with enough officers and people, you can pretty much ignore trade entirely. Although, of course, there's no harm in doing both. And you could just generate money. Oh, an earthquake. I've actually never had one of these. It's going to be a bit of minor damage that's going to cost me a little bit to repair, I would imagine. We'll see what happens. At least this one doesn't have a terrible cutscene associated with it. Every time you get hit by a tsunami, you get a cutscene that makes no damn sense, showing boats from 200 years ago. Always looks exactly the same. Alright, we lost 8 citizens. We had 2 buildings destroyed. Okay, that's kind of annoying, so you just... We can repair it, or we can salvage it. Just repair that one, and then it's just a case of looking around for the other one that went down. There we go. Problem solved. It's, you know, disasters are really not that disastrous, surprisingly enough. I imagine if you have a volcano on your island, then it would become particularly harsh, but most of the stuff that can throw at you, like tornadoes or earthquakes, are going to maybe knock down 1 or 2 buildings that require repair, kill a couple of citizens, and that's really about it. Nobody cares. So... I was talking about the various parts of the modern era that were fairly simple. And there's a lot of them. I mean, you've got a lot of space-saving stuff. You get your modern apartments. You can fit a lot of families into it. I've used a lot of modern apartments, and I do use some of the regular ones. The reason is that you want housing for the poor as well. In this case, most people aren't even living here. I don't have that many families living around this area. Mostly because I've increased the wages of everyone so much that, frankly, barely anyone needs poor housing. So a lot of these are really empty. A few of them have some people in, but if you lower the budget of a modern apartment too much, then what ends up happening is the quality of the housing is reduced so much that it just ends up being a pretty bad place to live. So modern apartments have to at least have a certain amount of budget. So usually they require like at least well-off or rich. These, you can put poor people in here. So you can reduce the amount of shacks that you get to almost 0, although playing the good old bonk the shack game is still kind of annoying. I still have 21 shacks somewhere. You'll never find them. Like, you can't locate the damn things. So you have to really, really look carefully if you want to find the shacks. Oh, this got... we lost the tavern there, so I can rebuild that. It's like looking around, trying to find the shacks. They're so small, they'll be located around here somewhere. But you can just replace them with housing and things like that. They don't really have a huge effect on you. So this is one shack here for no apparent reason because, you know, I imagine they cannot afford to live in here. Well, actually, I think they could. I don't know, you still need to be rich in order to live in this apartment, so maybe not. You could probably, that one's full up, so if I built one more house here, then that shack should probably disappear. And that's kind of what a lot of the modern era involves. It's just this sort of min-maxing and playing whack-a-mole with shacks and making sure that your accommodation is suitable for everyone on the island and hits all of the right demographics. But the big problem with the modern era, which is where the game kind of sputters and dies out, the Cold War, really, really good. Presents you with a bunch of different challenges. You're playing off the interests of the US and the Soviet Union. There is the genuine possibility of invasion. You're doing diplomatic maneuvering. You have to deal with things like the missile crisis. You can do all sorts of cool stuff, actually, in the Cold War. And, of course, you get electricity. So you have to deal with modernizing your housing, making sure you have enough power, and making sure your power grid's being built out. You get that's when you get your airport as well, so you can really hit the tourism. In fact, that's when tourism unlocks properly, so in the Cold War, you get a bunch of really interesting stuff dumped on you. But once you hit the modern era, there's actually not that many interesting things that you can do. At all. You'd be surprised. You can unlock things like the fashion company, which allows you to take your cloth and produce something more expensive. There's pharmaceuticals, which I don't even know what pharmaceuticals actually require. I think regularly they require nothing, but you can do an upgrade called Totally Natural, which allows you to turn oil into pharmaceuticals, which is kind of hilarious. Funnily enough, my pharmaceutical company for some reason doesn't make a lot of money. I'm not actually sure why that is. I've never really managed to figure that one out. I think it's because I haven't found too many places to export it to yet. It's actually quite difficult to get a trade route for that sort of thing. There we go, we've discovered the future, which gives us more money, and we just keep doing that again and again and again. But the modern era doesn't actually present you with any unique challenges. It opens up a bunch of diplomatic options. You can have a lot more embassies. You're dealing with a bunch of different factions, more so than you would be in any other era. But the thing is, they're all far less warmongering, so really the only reason you're trying to please them is to open up a few trade routes and get some freebies from them, which frankly, at this point, there's no real reason to even do. I could get a special mission. Let's go to the embassy, for instance, and let's try and get a special mission. So if I send a delegation over to the EU, I get a special mission. Build a new office! Gee, that's difficult. So build a new office, you'll gain a bunch of extra stuff. You can do this if you like, but once you're sort of at this point, one, the more difficult thing is actually finding the sodding office, but once you're at this point, you really don't have an awful lot to worry about. And there isn't anything unique that kicks in this era. You get a couple of extra trade goods. That's kind of about it. All of the interesting mechanics have been introduced in previous eras prior to that. There's the office. There we go. Could probably put one over here. We have a bunch of workers in this area, so we can maybe whack some people in an office. Heck, I could just rush the build on that. Why not? Actually, speaking of build, I can put out my... It's not my building permit edict. There's an edict which is... if I recall correctly, allows me to build stuff easier. Yes, the Urban Development Edict. There we go. Makes everything a lot cheaper. There we go. There's not really a lot else to worry about, which is unfortunate because up to this point in the last 3 eras, there was actually quite a lot to worry about, and the pacing seemed to be really, really good. You were dealing with a lot of very specific missions and issues. I wish this would go away. It's been sitting on the screen the entire time for some reason. I'm tempted to actually turn my building permit off to see if I can get rid of it, but it just won't go away. Just strange. I'm not sure what's going on with that. There was a lot of time-specific and era-appropriate missions you were dealing with. Things like, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Tropico version of that, and all sorts of things like that. But once you hit the modern era, there really isn't. Like, all that kind of dies off. And you will get some occasional things, like see if you can get the Pope to visit, which is actually a chain of missions. And that's cool, don't get me wrong. And every now and again, you'll get demands from the various factions on your island. So if we were to go to the factions, you'll see that things have sort of changed around just a little bit. Go to overall... Is it overall happiness? It's politics. There we go. So internal threat, not too much. No real unrest. And then if we click factions, there we go. Militarists, religious, communists, capitalists, environmentalists, industrialists, nationalists, and globalists. These are the guys you have to deal with. And I'm in poor standing with industrialists, and that's kind of annoying, but, I mean, I'm not going to lose an election. I'm never going to lose an election. There's no invasion threat whatsoever, and frankly, there never will be. because there's nothing that causes one of those to happen. You have to go out of your way to piss those people off. And frankly, once you start your nuclear program, invasion threat is going to be so much lower. Like, no one will ever bother you because, you know, you have a nuclear missile program, which requires really nothing, funnily enough. Like, you just need a few workers, and it costs you a little bit of money every month. In fact, I don't even think it does that. No, it doesn't require any cash. It's just a bunch of power. So it just sits there deterring foreign invasion, and your island just sits there making money. I mean, I've got to the point where crime is barely an issue. If we go to overlays, we can go to Ireland, and we can go to crime safety. This is all green. There's a couple of yellows here and there. I could maybe... I think I could do with a police station here, as that area is not all that well covered, but this area is just fine. Crime is barely a problem. There's nothing that pops out at me as saying, oh, this is an issue that I've got to deal with now. It all just calms down at the modern era, which is exactly what I was hoping it wouldn't do. Because that's where the game sputters out. That's where everything kind of falls apart. Because you get to this era, and it should be like a goal for you. It's like, wow, yeah, I can get to modern times, I can do all this cool stuff. The problem is you can't do all this cool stuff. There's actually not that much you can do in the modern era whatsoever. In fact, there's less. As I mentioned earlier, by this point, your island's probably going to be pretty much out of raw materials, with the exception of wood and maybe some of the offshore oil. So you don't really have to deal too much with the mining. You're probably just going to be buying everything. So you get some more docks, you trade some stuff in, you try and get some good trade routes. So you have to go check trade every once in a while to see if there's a really good trade route to nail. Like, I could get a jewelry trade route here, actually. That's amazing. Maybe I need to up my standing with the USA just a little bit, so I'd find the US Embassy, which, again, is kind of annoying. You have to click on this, you have to go to then buildings, look for Embassy, and then just kind of click through the different embassies to find out which is the right one. Which, again, is annoying. I think this really should have a separate menu, if I'm going to be honest. Diplomacy should be on a separate menu. I should not have to click through all of this stuff in order to make this work out. And then maybe if I want that, I'll push my diplomatic relations with the USA just a little bit. But it's mostly tweaking, and it's mostly min-maxing. Stuff's still going to sell, even if I don't have a trade route. It's just going to sell for less. Tourism's not really a big problem either. You're going to watch some pretty gnarly stuff going on here. You can build a bunch of cruise ships. You can build a lot of touristy kind of things. Yes, that's going to clip through that, as things clip through the lighthouse and all sorts of stuff like that. The cruise ships just sit off the coast and don't do anything, which I think is a wasted opportunity there as well. But build some tourist stuff. You cater to the various kinds of tourists, the slob tourists, family tourists, eco tourists, so on and so forth. Build that stuff up, put it in the right place, put some entertainment there, and Bob's your uncle. It's going to make you a bit of cash. This really needs to go away. I don't know why it's still there.
It has come to my attention that
I should probably do that as well. And that's it. Like, it stops there. So I kind of regret getting to modern era as fast as I did. I think I should have just hovered around in the Cold War for a little bit longer, as that is where the really interesting stuff happens. So, what I think is the best approach... Yeah, of course I'll have elections, why not? It's like, I've got 71% approval rate, I'll pass them easily, I've never failed one. I think my conclusion is at this point that it's a very unfortunate turn of events that once you get to the era that you were so kind of desperately trying to get to, things get really, really boring and all the pressure comes off. All of it. There's no real problem you have to deal with, because chances are you've stabilized by the time you hit the modern era. All of your unrest, you probably got that out of the way during either the World Wars or during the Cold War era. So once that's all done, you're stable, you're fine. You're making money hand over fist. You just keep building and try and make your city as large as possible. I think the way to play this game is to up the difficulty level. I genuinely believe that. Because once you get to modern era, it is easy street, and I really mean that. You get so many things which make you money hand over fist, whether it be the offices, whether it be hydroponic farms. These take up way less space. Generally speaking, they work in more environments than a regular farm would, so you can dump them almost anywhere, especially if you upgrade them. And the effectiveness is 295 effectiveness. 295. You get the agricultural subsidies edict, you up the budget a little bit, get these upgrades. It doesn't matter what location this thing is in, it's going to grow whatever, wherever. forever, as long as you are willing to spend the initial outlay. It's going to produce a ton of stuff, so much that I don't even have enough Teamsters to carry it around all over the place. In fact, I'm going to just build some more Teamsters offices just to make sure that I can do that. Except I can't build it there. This one little area has been annoying the hell out of me because I can't quite build anything there because it's slightly on an angle. Ugh, nothing more infuriating than that. Really? That's not an even. That looks absolutely fine. You could build your office there. It's got a bit of a slant. It's not a big deal, but come on, there's got to be somewhere I can build this thing. Ugh. This area. Tell you, if there's one thing I would have liked, it's the ability for El Presidente to bloody well terraform. As I said, the officers just generate money hand over fist and have a very small footprint. So all of the sprawl that you had in the middle, you just demolish everything, replace it with modern apartments and with officers, and suddenly the sprawl that you had becomes mega efficient in every possible respect, and it becomes clean, and as long as you have the proper amount of amenities around, everyone's going to be pretty much happy. Nothing to really worry about anywhere. But yeah, if you up the difficulty level, I think it would probably be a little bit more interesting. This is on medium. Medium is far too easy. I've only run into a couple of crises that have really been a problem. I had a huge invasion after I did a mission that involved stealing the Nobel Prize and then, like, literally going out of my way to antagonize another nation. I was invaded, I think, by the Swedish, which was hilarious. And that was easy because once you build the aircraft carrier, you do precision bombing runs automatically against invading enemies, so you'll lose a couple of guard towers and maybe a soldier here or there, but the chances are you're going to win without too much of a problem there. And as I said, no one's going to invade you unless you actively provoke them to do so. But yeah, at that point, that's it. Well, you don't have a goal anymore. And I feared this would be the case. And it is something that happens with a lot of city builders. You reach the point where your technology is as high as it could possibly get, and then you just coast. But I think that there's a key missed opportunity to bring in a bunch of new problems that you have to deal with in the modern era. Considering the economy, for instance, would there be a big recession or a global economic crisis that would affect you in some way? Would pollution become more of a problem? Well, it becomes less of a problem. Again, managing pollution is very easy. Dump down a couple of waste treatment plants, and the chances are you're going to be absolutely fine. Current pollution, is there any? Barely. Look at that. That's a lot of green, and I'm barely even trying. As long as you issue that clean, zero emissions, a little bit of constitutional amendment there, you're absolutely fine. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. I also kind of object to the lack of information that gets given to you. The way that they have dealt with the traffic problems that plagued the previous games is to introduce the metro station. Now, you can pop this down. It says, allows citizens to quickly travel around the city without using cars. Do they? I don't even know, because this was their easy cop-out way of actually putting a proper subway system into the game. All that actually happens is a rebel, by the looks of it. We shall discredit the rebel. There we go. That'll cause a few problems. That'll probably cause unrest even further, but there you go. These metro stations, do they actually do anything? No idea! Like, as far as I know, they work. But it's hard to say, because there's never any way to monitor that. There's no overlay to show you if there's any traffic problems. The only thing you can do is look at the visual representation on the screen, and I don't know if that's even accurate. I have no idea if these cars mean anything. Clicking on the cars will not actually do anything whatsoever, yeah? So I don't know if there's anyone really in there, if it represents anything, if there's actually a traffic problem. None of my citizens have ever complained. So, yeah, there's that. And, keeping the rebels under wraps, not a problem at all. Once everyone's pretty happy, once everyone's well paid, which is extremely easy to do. Good lord, we can upgrade that one heavily, can't we? There we go. Let's make that even more efficient. Again, I have so much stuff, I don't even have enough output storage to deal with it. We should put another Teamsters office there just to make sure. And things just kind of tick over nicely. And I didn't want them to tick over nicely at the end, so yeah. I will try another run, and I think I'll do it on a much harder difficulty, and then hopefully it means that by the time I reach the modern era, I will still have a bunch of problems in my city. Not that I will be living on an island utopia, which has no problems of any description, and then the modern era just gives me 1,000,000,001 ways to make money hand over fist for no reason. So there is that. I think the multiplayer probably gives it a degree of longevity as well, and I think the campaign is definitely the way to go. This is, of course, all in sandbox mode, so if I've got everything perfect by Modern Era, then the island itself is still going to be fine. On campaign mode, you're forced to go to different islands with different objectives, and things are driven by a story and custom missions, and the game has loading screens, by the way. I just want to point this out. Loading screens in the middle of a city build. It's very weird. It's very, very strange that it would do that, but there you go. It is, I think, more of a game that is focused on the campaign. Play the campaign, enjoy the campaign, and of course, try out the multiplayer. I've not had a chance to. I've tried. There aren't actually that many games in multiplayer going. Most people seem to like the single player. I'd love to try the multiplayer out at some point. I can't imagine it's going to be brilliant, because the warfare system in this game is genuinely pretty terrible. It doesn't do anything. It's just build some military buildings and they will automatically defend you. There's no actual RTS component to it whatsoever. Adding the tanks in and adding the airplanes in are really just different kinds of unit. The airplanes just attack automatically unless you tell them not to, and the tanks just roll out whenever they need to and fight, and then the guard towers have machine guns in them, and frequently get demolished, and then you have to re-upgrade them with machine guns, which is the most annoying little bit of fiddly micromanagement ever. And that's kind of it, you know? So, it's a good game. It's a good Tropico game, but Tropico remains that more casual city builder that generally gives you a fairly easy time of it, that's carried by its theme. It's still a good city builder, especially considering we don't actually have that many around at the moment. But it peters out in the last era. It fizzles, and it just falls limply on the floor, desperately crying for your attention, and at that point, it just doesn't really get it. So it is one of those games that I can still kind of recommend as a city builder, at least up until that point, especially on harder difficulty, but I have a feeling what's going to happen is the same thing that happened with all the other Tropico games. They'll release loads of DLC, and they'll release an expansion. And once they've done that, there'll be the inevitable Gold Edition, which has probably got enough content for you to actually give a damn. And hopefully at that point as well, they will look at the modern era and say, oh yeah, so we kind of lost the plot when it comes to the modern era, didn't we? Yes, we did. We should probably do something about that to actually introduce some proper challenges within the modern era. Otherwise, people will get bored by the end of it and just want to start a new island. And I prefer not to. You know, I'd like to cover my entire island, but I know I'm not going to really run into any problems other than my limited budget. So I'll throw down as much stuff as possible, wait for my budget to refill, which it inevitably will, because I have a million and one ways of making money, and then build again and again and again and again. As long as I don't forget my police stations, taverns, and power, I'm all right. So yeah. Last era is flawed, but otherwise not too shabby. I would love them to put more information into this damn game. I really would. There's a decent amount here, but I think there could be way more overlays than currently exist. Things like traffic and all sorts of things like that. I would really love to know what's going on with that. I would like that to actually get sorted out, and I just hope that the game is far more challenging if I up the difficulty level. Ladies and gentlemen, my name has been TotalBiscuit. My conclusion here on Tropico 5 in the modern era. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.